Good morning, everyone. My name is Glenn Howard. I'm the president of the Jamestown Foundation, and we'd also like to wish a good afternoon to our friends in Europe who are watching us and other places of the world. We're very excited to host this discussion today, making sense of new U.S. basing decisions in Europe, a conversation with Phil Breedlove and Ben Hodges. And I'd like to thank everyone for trying to take the time to listen in. It's a very important issue. As many of you know from watching the news, on July 29th, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper announced that the United States would be pulling 12,000 U.S. troops out of Germany, and that some of these troops will be repositioned in other parts of Europe, while the remaining number will be sent back to bases in the United States. Then, this past Sunday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced that U.S. forces of about 1,000 men would be sent to bases in Poland. Altogether, with this most recent announcement, the July 29th decision, these decisions some sense of some of the, and offer you some insights into how these announcements are going to affect the U.S. defense posture, and more importantly, assess its impact on the rest of NATO. For that reason, we decided to title our event today, Making Sense of New U.S. Basing Decisions in Europe. Joining us are two distinguished gentlemen. Retired General Philip Breedlove is the former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. He's currently a distinguished professor at the Stanton School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. Our other presenter today is the Honorable Ben Hodges, who's currently the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, otherwise known as CEPA. He's also the former Commanding General of the U.S. Army Forces in Europe. So both gentlemen have perspectives to present on these recent announcements. I'd like to make a note from Jamestown, as president of Jamestown, just like to note that today's discussion, as we want to be very clear, the purpose of our discussion today is to have a frank and open discussion to talk about the new U.S. basing announcement and basically see if we can discuss the impact of the decisions. We don't have any type of political view or agenda on the decisions, whether it's good or bad, but we just want to kind of make sense of it and try to provide some perspectives. And of course, there will be some personal views shared today, as we want to try to make this conversation as rich as possible. So we're going to start off with General Phil Breedlove, who's going to offer us a bit of scene setting, and he's going to walk us through some of the announced changes. And then following him will be General Hodges, who will be talking about the strategic implications of these changes from a variety of different perspectives. I would say that General Breedlove and General Hodges have two things in common. Both of them witnessed the invasion and annexation of Crimea and Donbass in 2014 from their positions, respectively, within Europe. And they have a very strong emotional attachment to NATO and the defense of our allies in Eastern Europe, particularly Ukraine. So when we discuss this decision today, we'll be trying to assess how these changes are going to affect U.S. basing posture and how they'll affect the capabilities of the United States and the Mediterranean and also in the Black Sea. So Phil, the floor is yours, and please offer some scene setting here and kind of walk us through some of your perspectives on these announcements.
Okay, Glenn, thank you for having me, and thank you to the audience for giving us your time today. I look forward to our questions and answers. I must presage everything I say with these are my opinions, not the opinions of the U.S. government, U.S. military, the DOD, or anyone else. I offer you my thoughts. Geostrategic, I always like to start with a familiar refrain for me, and that is that NATO is more important now than it's ever been since the fall of the wall. If we look around our neighborhood that we're talking about, we still have Russians occupying Crimea. We still have Russians involved in the conflict and supporting and enabling the conflict in Donbass. We face probably the toughest hybrid, even though that word was invented during my time. I like now to talk more about war below the lines, however you want to call it, but we face this tough threat across all of these tools that we used to have, but now from disinformation on through little green men, we face this tough hybrid threat out there. We see inside of our own alliance, as well as externally, issues in the Eastern Mediterranean. And how does our alliance support our efforts to handle the challenges we see in the East Med? And then I don't think any of us really understand quite yet what's going on in Belarus. This could turn out to be a lot of nothing. It could turn out to be a real issue. And so I don't think it takes much of a stretch to understand how important our alliance is and what that alliance means to peace in the larger terms on Europe than today. I want to talk a little bit about what I think are some of the centers of gravity of our alliance. The first one is our solidarity, our ability, our cohesiveness as we face these challenges that I meant, that we remain focused on unity of purpose. Yes, we've got issues in the North and East, and we've got issues in the South, but that unity of purpose of working together to address these issues is really important. And then let's just not forget our commitment to Article 5. These are all things that I think are center of gravity of our alliance. And clearly, Mr. Putin has different goals for our alliance, and frankly, for the EU as well. And to try to make cracks in that alliance and find a place that he can live in there and expand and move alliance members further and further apart. And how he and his war below the lines, our hybrid campaign, can discredit Western democracies and discredit the entire thought of those shared values of the alliance in the West. So I think as we look at these changes that the United States has posed, I think we should have some focus areas. Yes, there are some opportunities posed by some of these changes. A focus on the Black Sea with the possible move of the Stryker Brigade. And I'm going to try to leave the discussion of the Army pieces to Ben, who is all an expert for those things. And there are opportunities that moving fighter squadrons closer to the Mediterranean and Black Sea could pose in this. So we should not take only a concerning stance on what I think we do need to focus on the impacts to our centers of gravity. Will these changes truly increase the solidarity of our alliance? Will these changes allow us to focus better on unity of purpose? And how will these changes either increase or decrease our commitment to Article 5? Finally, I think there's some pretty serious concerns about costs. And just to throw a few on the table, moving the 480th to Aviano, which is one of the Air Force pieces, makes a lot of sense in some ways, consolidating F-16 ops, some savings to the larger maintenance capability that could be better utilized in a 3-squadron wing at Aviano, et cetera. But having commanded Aviano as a young brigadier general, there's also some big costs down at Aviano. Remember, we don't have any on-base housing at Aviano. So we're going to have to figure out how to increase those off-base housing opportunities that we have down there. Schools, gymnasiums, all those things will have to be talked about. And then finally, Mildenhall. What an amazing base. What a great legacy in the UK that Mildenhall has posed for us. Back when I was the USAFE commander, before becoming the SACEUR, we looked at moving forces out of Mildenhall to Spangalum. For one of the reasons was because Spangalum has the newest, best infrastructure of any air base in Europe. And the cost for hosting units there would be, then again, we love Mildenhall. We love the UK support to the mission, but Mildenhall's infrastructure is the oldest in Europe. And we were looking to not have to make investments in that infrastructure. And that was one of the big reasons. So I'm not judging what has happened or whatever. I just think that in the realm of costs, there are a lot of things that we need to look at here. So I think I'm going to stop there. hand it over to Ben and let him talk, and hopefully a little more specifically to land moves. And I look forward to all of your questions and answers as we follow up.
Ben?
Thanks, Glenn and Phil, and thanks to Jamestown for hosting this. I think this is an important topic, and of course, former SACUR has done a nice job as usual of laying out the strategic context for all of this. I'll say right up front, of course, that I was disappointed at the decision and the announcement, how it was done, not so much all of the content. And we'll talk to some of the content here. Germany is our most important ally in Europe. It's maybe one of the most important allies in the world because of its geography, its economic power, and it's the moral authority that Germany has earned over the past 70 plus, almost 75 years. So the United States should be doing everything we can to pursue Germany as our most important ally it's probably the only country that could influence criminal behavior, for example. That's my concern. The decision has come out. Having said that, I think it's useful for everybody to keep in mind it is going to take months to plan and years to execute. So almost nothing that was Vice Chairman and the SACUR back in July, almost none of that's going to happen in this calendar year. And in fact, I would bet that almost none of it will happen next year because the process for making these kinds of moves is by law, and just the normal process is going to take a long time. Not because people are slow rolling, as you hear people say every now and then, but because this is hard, detailed government work, and multiple nations are involved in the basing decisions. And I think the Congress has probably already said that no money from 2021 budget will be used to do any of this. So this is why it's so important that the administration, and particularly the Department of Defense, work closely with the Congress in order to get the best strategic effect out of whatever the final moves are that are going to be made. That would be the first important implication I'd want to highlight: the time and the need to work with the Congress as well as all the nations involved. Second, I listened closely to the Secretary's 5 priorities that he laid out at the beginning, the 5 priorities for the plan, and actually General Hyten, the Vice Chairman, referred to it as a concept, not yet a plan. That the 5 priorities included flexibility, strengthening the alliance, and so on. And I think that remains to be seen on whether or not this concept actually achieves those 5 priorities. What I was listening for but did not hear, but it will inform for sure the decisions and planning that are made in the coming years, is readiness. How do any of these moves improve the readiness of U.S. forces in Europe? And of course, for readiness, you've got to have places to train. For land forces, of course, that means ranges and maneuver areas, but also the chance to train live fire with air forces and with allies. Also maintenance facilities, and how fast can you deploy from that location, whether it's by ground, rail, or air or seaport. So I think readiness is something that needs to be looked at very closely. That half of 173rd Airborne Brigade lives in Germany, in Grafenwehr, because today there is no place for all of them to train in Italy. So these are the things that'll have to be looked at, and I'm sure that U.S. European Command and U.S. Army Europe are doing that, looking hard at that now. And of course, there's a cost associated with that. A third point that I'd like to put out there is Germany's role in the alliance. I told you up front how I believe that Germany is our most important ally for all those reasons. That doesn't mean we have to love each other or we're going to get along with each other on everything, but it is the ally that we need. And I think we need to look at Germany's role differently from when Lieutenant Breedlove and Captain Breedlove served in Germany and when I served in Germany. Back in the Cold War, Germany was a frontline state, West Germany, right on the inter-German border. You needed a huge Bundeswehr and a huge Luftwaffe and a large German Navy it was a frontline state facing about 1 million Soviet and Warsaw Pact troops. The front lines literally thousands to the east. I think that Germany's role today should obviously be to maintain a capable Bundeswehr, probably about the size it has now, at least in terms of ground forces, at a much better level of readiness, of course. But Germany today is what UK, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg were during the Cold War, what we used to call the communication zone, the logistical rear, the foundation in order to launch operations. And our potential opponents in the Kremlin know that if we don't have a strong logistical base, if we don't have the ability to command and control to enable rapid reinforcement, then we really do not have a capable deterrent. It's not those infantrymen and armor and jet fighters that are out there. It's all the stuff behind it. And I think that's the role for Germany today, for headquarters, logistics, transportation, air and missile defense. And so if we look at Germany in that role, then maybe we also need to take a look at 2%. What does 2% mean? Right now, when we're 2%, they think, okay, we got to grow the size of the sphere. And I would say that Germany and other countries that improve transportation capability, that improve logistics capability, that improve the ability of the alliance to rapidly reinforce and move, to include cyber protection for all of this transportation infrastructure, I think there ought to be a formula where that counts towards 2%. And I think if you did that, you would see that 2% needle flying up in Germany and other countries because it's something that domestically is more palatable. And I will stop there. Glenn, thanks again for what Jamestown does. You guys do a great job on publishing articles as well as hosting meaningful discussions. So thanks for letting me be a part of this.
Ben, thanks for sharing your thoughts and always participating. We're great always to team up with SEPA. I'd like to, General Breedlove, I'd like to ask, there's someone asked a question here about the 2% mark. The German defense minister recently suggested that the cost of NATO be shared by each country on some percentage of total cost, rather than the 2% GDP formula. So in Germany's case, it'd be 10%. So this is a question coming from Greg, one of the people watching. He says, could each of you comment on this approach kind of to sharing costs and address that? Because for those listening, Germany's not supposed to reach 2% until the year 2031. So maybe, you know, are we too hung up on 2%? Do we want more Bundeswehr boots on the ground, or do we want Germany to provide more more train cars for transportation of NATO forces? So Phil, I'll let you kind of address that, and then Ben, you can chime in.
So the positive first, if Germany took that, if NATO had addressed that and Germany began to invest more, that's a positive. The concern of that, I was in the room at the Wales conference when all the countries agreed to 2%, and Germany's plan was to get there by 2024. So the question is, strategically has changed? Have we seen less of a threat, less of a concern since Wales? I don't think that to be the case. But I think that Ben has made some great points, and I tried to make this point about some of the nations in NATO at the time too. And that is that there are intangibles that these nations are providing. Can you imagine doing anything in the Middle East without the throughput of Spangdahlem, Ramstein, and the hospital at Larmsee in Germany? The number of lives that were saved because of the medical system that passed through Germany to get our folks stable and through their first several tough surgeries on the way home. I mean, these are intangibles, and that was part of the complaint, I think, of the nations of not recognizing these intangibles. I often tell a short story about, imagine if a foreign country came to Florida, Alabama, and Louisiana and said, we need to send some troops there, be in your country, and we're going to need to move them around sometimes with less than 48 hours notice among your 3 states. How do you think that our states and our governors and our leaders would react to a request like that? Well, that's exactly what we do with Spain, Greece, Germany, and others when we're reacting to North Africa. We built this force which lives in Morone to try to be better ready for a Benghazi of the future. And we end up moving forces around inside of these bases, sometimes on less than 2 days' notice. So there are intangibles, but I have always been a supporter of the 2%. I believe that it's a good start. But again, to close as I started with a positive, if some new format came out, which encouraged nations to invest more, that's a good first step.
Ben?
So the key is the political courage to explain what the threat is. I mean, if the average voter doesn't see a threat, or if our elected officials don't say, here's a real threat, then of course they're not going to support spending more on defense. They're going to spend it on education, healthcare, transportation infrastructure, you name it. So there's frankly a terrible shortage of political courage across Europe when it comes to laying out what the actual threats are. And most countries in Europe have a coalition government. And so even if the chancellor woke up every morning in Berlin saying, we're going to get to 2%, like I told everybody we would, it's never going to happen because the coalition government here will prevent that. So I think that I would not support moving the goalposts around, but I do support changing what counts towards that 2%. And if the needle in the direction, then I think you'd have a lot less pressure from the White House on this that led to this decision. Now, this is not the only thing, of course, but I think this is a part of it, or at least it provided the opportunity. But the unwillingness or the inability to talk about the threat, and frankly, the fact that the White House is not really clear about the Kremlin's malign behavior, that's not likely to inspire Germany or Belgium or the Netherlands or Italy or Norway or others to beat that drum either. So things like transportation, the alliance needs that more than anything. Right now, Deutsche Bahn, which is the principal rail network operating out of Germany, has enough rail capacity to move 1.5 armored brigades simultaneously. That's it. That's not 1.5 American. That's 1.5 total. I guarantee you, when General Breedlove was sacked here, he would have expected us to be able to move a lot more stuff a lot faster to prevent a crisis from happening. So there is a dramatic shortage of rail capacity in Europe. Why not figure out a way to incentivize Germany and other nations to spend on rail capacity to help the alliance and let that count towards 2%, as well as the cyber protection of fuel pipelines, power grid, and of course, transportation.
Joe Breedlove, I'd like to take a second and bring up on the screen a map showing where American air bases are in Europe, and kind of, if you could just walk us through. You've talked about Mildenhall and you talked about Spangolum, and we wanted to pull this up. We found a very good map last night that kind of highlights where these air bases are, and then and some of the changes that are going to be occurring. You've talked about Mildenhall and you've talked a little bit about Spangolum and Aviano. So what will we had a question from one person was asking about how these changes are going to affect kind of our posture in Europe. And could you just look at this map and just kind of walk us through a little bit about the importance of these air bases and just kind of share your thoughts and what will also be the impact of EUCOM and Africa Command is being moved to Italy. Is that a good move in terms of how we look at the Mediterranean, and how does this affect us in the Black Sea? So,
Yes. Okay. So this is an interesting map. As Ben alluded, Captain Phil Breedlove first went to the Europe in the early 80s, and it was a very different map then, and it was a very different army map then, and it was a very different Bundeswehr map then. So this first and most striking thing about this is how far we have cut in Europe, and I've not been a fan of further cuts in Europe. Let's just revisit the Mildenhall piece. We talked about the Mildenhall not moving. That, again, is, I think, more about an issue of cost in the future than it is repositioning those assets. Moving them to Spangalum would have put them a little closer to the concerning areas, but it's not that much. So I think the cost piece there is an issue. And Lakenheath being in the north sure did work out well for us when we needed them to rapidly respond when Russia invaded the Donbass and started supporting the fight in the Donbass. Remember, essentially 18 hours from command to show when we needed caps from Lakenheath in the north. The movement of the fighter squadron out of Spangalum to Aviano does bring that force a little closer to the Black Sea, as the Secretary of Defense did mention. I would also mention it brings it a lot closer to the Mediterranean. And remember, we have some issues right now in the Eastern Mediterranean. And then I think I would just, Ben's already talked about Germany as that logistical rear area, so I won't talk about Ramstein other than to remind, not only is it that huge throughput base, but it is that huge medical base that saved thousands of American lives. And we haven't really talked about Turkey and some of the issues surrounding Turkey, but the air base in Turkey, Incirlik, which I started going to in about 1984, is absolutely key and essential to what we do in the future in many parts of Europe, but also in all of our endeavors in the Middle East. And so from an Air Force perspective, we actually are about as thin as we can get there now.
Ben, when you look at this map, you commented previous in discussions yesterday that you thought that Germany's real value to NATO is more of kind of a combat enabler in terms of its importance as a logistical hub. Could you just go into that a little bit about, and that we need to look at Germany differently now and its role within NATO as opposed during the days of the Fulda Gap in the 1980s?
So the front line, like I say, used to be the inter-German border between East and West Germany. It's now to the east of Poland. And you look at, and I'm looking at your map. On the coloring of the map, it sort of looks like you've got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, still part of the Soviet Union there, Glenn. I don't know who you're.
We could blame the Air Force for that.
But look, the front line, is way to the east, and you think about the range of weapons that the Kremlin has in Kaliningrad and in Crimea, and even what they've put into Syria, and of course what they're doing up in the north along the northern transit route. Their ability to range seaports and airports in Eastern Europe is significant. So Germany, not only does it have the most modern infrastructure in all of Europe, the capacity to handle things, we've also got a little bit of distance. And because of the economic power and that geographic location and infrastructure, it is a logical place to be the transit hub. And Germany has accepted that mission, by the way. You stood up the JSEC, the Joint Sustainment Enabling Command in Ulm, because it's the logical country to host that headquarters that would help with rapid reinforcement and also to manage the rear area for the alliance. So that doesn't mean that we don't need strong Bundeswehr, high quality Air Force, Navy, and land forces. But the whole point is when you look at the map, and then when you think about 2%, encouraging or telling our German allies, hey, look, we need you to continue investing in transportation capacity, logistics capacity, as well as maintaining readiness. And by the way, the United States has only one Patriot battalion in all of Europe, and that battalion is going to have to protect Ramstein. So we need Germany and the Netherlands, who have Patriot, to provide missile and air defense for Baltic countries. Poland, our great ally, the Poles, of course, is joining the Patriot community, as Romania has. And so I think Poland is going to help provide this sort of air and missile defense protection, because if there's a crisis, or we're trying to prevent a crisis, and people are moving and forces are moving through Poland, they're going to be very vulnerable. So having this air and missile defense umbrella over Poland is also going to be very important. Glenn, if I could make one last point, you know, what's interesting is you see the Black Sea in Turkey, and this is 100% natural. They're always at the bottom right-hand corner of the map. If you go to any NATO headquarters, where the map is usually of all of Europe,
Yeah.
Turkey and the Black Sea are at the bottom right-hand corner. And unfortunately, that affects how we think about things too. And I'm glad that Phil highlighted the importance of Incirlik Air Base. That boundary between U.S. European Command and U.S. Central Command, by the way, that's also how the Department of State sort of divides up regions of the world as well. We look at Turkey and the Black Sea in a way completely different from how the Russians look at it, and obviously how the Turks look at it. And I think it causes us to make some short-sighted decisions. The Black Sea is clearly the priority for the Kremlin. It is the launching pad for everything they do in Syria, Eastern Mediterranean, and in Libya. And General Breedlove coined the phrase just a few years ago. He said that the Kremlin had weaponized refugees. That was not an accident or collateral damage. It was the Kremlin support for the Assad regime that put more than 3 million refugees on the road into Turkey and to Europe. So the alliance has got to focus on the Black Sea and not allow the Russians free reign there.
And I would go just one further on the, I hate to bash you, Glenn, but complain about the map. Remember what happened when Russia first started putting their forces into Syria. We had missile shots out of the Caspian Sea. And just like we did, I'm not bashing the Russians, they had some trouble with those missiles. The performance was not too good, just like our performance was not too good when we started shooting our Tomahawks and things decades ago. But the message, I think, was less about the accuracy on what they impacted in Syria and more about, hey, we could sit in our own backyard lake, the Caspian Sea, and fire on European headquarters, even from here. So, you know, when we think about this area of operations, not only does this map put Turkey in the bottom right corner, but it doesn't go far enough to show that Russia has shown capability from as far east as the Caspian Sea.
I certainly want to, maybe this would be a good opportunity. We're going to try to pull up another map here, but could you just address, Ben, you mentioned Black Sea just briefly, what will be the impact? One of the decisions that came out of the Esper press briefing was to move a Stryker brigade as a part of the redeployments back to the U.S., but then the brigade will be shifted over to Black Sea. Whether or the timing on when that's going to happen, what is the strategic impact of a Stryker brigade being in either Romania or Bulgaria? And most people would say that Romania makes is the better solution. But what does a Stryker brigade do to U.S. mobility in that very important part of the world you just pointed out?
Okay, well, a couple of points. First of all, you know, that was news to Chief of Staff for the Army and to the commander of U.S. Army Europe that a Stryker brigade was being considered for deployment to the Black Sea region. So, like I said at the beginning, years to plan or months to plan and years to execute. So perhaps there will be a deployment of a Stryker brigade, a rotational brigade to the Black Sea region in a few years, maybe a couple years, I'm not sure. I would love it. Now, I do not want to see the 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment, which is currently based in Vilseck, where it has fantastic training opportunities to build readiness there at Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, Bavaria. It's also the only real combat power with wheels and armor that can move quickly all over Europe and doesn't have to rely on trains or heavy equipment transports. So I'd hate to see the commander of U.S. Army Europe lose that asset that he controlled. But that's the point of your question is, what's the benefit of a Stryker brigade if it goes there? I love the idea of a Stryker brigade being the rotational force that goes there, just like we have an armor brigade combat team that rotates in and out of Poland. Frankly, the transportation network in Romania, according to the European Union analysis, is the worst in Europe. It's not a good network. And so having wheeled vehicles would still provide, or with Strykers, you could move laterally north and south around the region, even through Moldova or to Ukraine if you had to, for training exercises or for crisis prevention. That's what a Stryker brigade gives to you. It brings a lot of infantry, a lot of tank killing capability. It gives you ability. Now, what I would anticipate would happen is that brigade's rotation would probably be split predominantly in Romania at MK, for example, which is what the rotational armored battalion uses now, and a couple of other places. Our Romanian allies are doing what our Polish allies are doing, which is significantly improving the facilities, the capacity, and most importantly, the training areas, the ranges, so that we can maintain the right level of readiness. Bulgaria, thanks to the long distance foresight of people like Jim Townsend, when he was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, we have a place called Novosela Training Area down in Bulgaria that is a good place for a couple of companies to be able to do good combined arms live fire training. But with Strykers, we've moved across the Black Sea on ferries from Bulgaria to Georgia for exercises. What a great training opportunity that was. So a Stryker unit gives you a lot of flexibility in the Black Sea region and be able to do joint live fire training with the world's greatest Air Force and the rest of our allies, or to participate in exercises like Sea Breeze, even in a Ukrainian training area. A lot of potential there.
Thank you, Ben. I think that idea needs to be explored. And by the way, the map we're using today, full credit goes to SEPA. That's one of your maps. So we're all trying to help each other here. So that's very useful. But Joe Breedlove, I want to get back to you about when we're talking about air bases. Ben was talking about Romania. I mean, isn't the MK Air Base in Romania becoming the major kind of new Ramstein of the East? We've invested $8 billion for the first tranche of European Reassurance Initiative money to make upgrades in our Air Force infrastructure in Eastern Europe, and that MK Air Base is really becoming a pretty huge, large component of our air operations. Do you have any comments on that or thoughts about the Romania and that air base?
Well, first of all, let's back out and get the eyes up on the horizon a little bit more. I like the way Ben has been saying this for months now about we need to look at the importance of the Black Sea region. If you look at what Russia has done building land, air, and sea power in Crimea, if you look at what Russia has done denying the entry into the Sea of Azov, and what that does to Ukraine in their ability to do commerce, et cetera, et cetera. The Black Sea is a challenging and challenged place. And as I was leaving, as a SACUR, we saw the NATO navies of the Black Sea operating primarily in the southwest corner because of the extent of the coastal cruise missiles, et cetera, that have been put in the Russian part of the Black Sea and in Crimea. And so we in the United States have made a huge investment. First of all, in 4 incredible ships out of Rota that take Aegis capability on a routine basis into the Black Sea. In the, as you mentioned, MK base, I think it's a little bit of a stretch to call it the Ramstein of the East, but your point is very good in that it has become a major through point capability and a training capability, where we have had Marines, Army, Air Force deployments in there to get experience in this level and to help train with our Romanian brothers and sisters and other NATO allies that have come in there as well. So I think, again, the big point, the emphasis on the Black Sea is a good one. I agree with Ben. Coming at a loss to a major unit in Germany, that's tough to swallow. But that rotation capability in the Black Sea is a welcome thought. And the ability now to bring air, land, and sea answers to the challenges that Russia puts up in the Black Sea is very important.
Definitely, and I thank for both of you for sharing. I think, you know, one of the things that we want to move on to in the discussion is I'd like to remind all our listeners that if there's a question feature in the Zoom webinar chat, so if you have questions, please feel free to type one up and ask, and we'll try to get to your questions here in good order. And we are going to try to make our way through those. But I'd like to ask, you know, one of the things that we haven't talked about, going back to the June 29 or July 29 decision or announcement, is that there's a lot of things that have been said that, for example, I think yesterday it was discussed in our pre-conference discussion that Congress has to make the appropriations possible for the shifting around of some of these command headquarters. And so, such as moving from Stuttgart for AFRICOM to move out of Stuttgart to moving to Italy. And then there's a decision about moving to Mons. And you mentioned, and Phil, in your talk, that Mons is going to be a huge bear to move everything there. Ben, you had mentioned that Germany is really concentrated with HQs and is really an HQ hub of sorts for a lot of NATO command infrastructure. So what is going to be the impact on moving to Mons? Phil, if you want to kind of talk about that. You mentioned earlier there's not a lot of infrastructure there, but the alliance has had to move headquarters before. I mean, we had a rupture with France in the 1960s, and JFK moved to the headquarters to Mons. Originally, I think, is where it was, and then so we have had to play this game when we've had disagreements with our allies over certain issues. So it's certainly not, this isn't the first kind of rupture we've had in this Germany aspect of our basing decisions to get them to pay more. So, I mean, we did have problems with France previously in the past, historically. So, Phil, anyway, go ahead and talk about.
So may I also just answer very quickly another interesting question that's in that chat or in the Q&A list that's associated. And that is, someone asked, is this another opportunity to look at recombining AFRICOM and EUCOM? I'm sure that will be discussed somewhere. Now, I'm just going to offer you my sense of this. I think AFRICOM has a big job and plenty of job for a headquarters. When I was in place as the commander of Africa and USAFE, this is a tough business of looking at both the requirements, and with so few assets in Europe, as far as air assets, it was a tough job. So while I'm sure someone will consider bringing them back together, it would not be my recommendation. I think Africa's mission is huge, and it's big enough, and it's tough enough, and it's going to grow in the future rather than shrink in the future. So let me throw that out there. The move to Mons is another one of those challenges and opportunities. I mean, the idea of having the synergy of the staffs and things like that even though today, and I agree with Ben's, some of Ben's words, in this day of electronic capability, we don't have to have staffs together. If they were there together, clearly there would be some synergies. But again, sort of like the Mildenhall piece, when we were looking at Mons, when I was there would be a huge challenge to move that headquarters in there. The Belgians are magnificent and wonderful hosts. I still have great friends there, but the housing, the schools, the hospitals, things like that, this would be quite the challenge to move to Mons. But again, I think you paint this in the both opportunity and challenge bucket.
Ben, did you have any?
Yeah, just two quick points. I saw a question earlier saying that since the president had said that this move out of Germany was because Germany was not paying its fair share, and of course we've seen the comments about why are 30,000 Americans there guarding Germany? That's not an accurate portrayal of what actually goes on. You actually have German security protecting all the American bases and housing areas in Germany, ironically. But somebody asked a question, is it safe to assume then that where these people are going are European countries that are spending 2%? And of course, Italy and Belgium both spend much less than Germany does. Italy is a 1.2%. Belgium is not even 1%, they're 0.9%. So, former Secretary General Breedlove is exactly right. This is about cohesion of the alliance. And so these kind of actions and decisions, I don't think contribute to cohesion of the alliance. Now, the other part of this, and this goes a little bit to the conversation about Spangdahlem, as well as some other places. The idea of combining AFRICOM and EUCOM, it's a terrible idea for exactly why General Breedlove said it. But if you're a million miles away and you're thinking just in terms of efficiency, sometimes the idea of streamlining, which is a wonderful bureaucratic word, we're going to streamline things, we're going to combine all these headquarters. Those are ideas by people that have no clue what's actually involved and what's going on. EUCOM is too small to do what it's doing already. AFRICOM is too small to do what it's doing already. AFRICOM should stay, for sure, it should stay in Europe, because it has to be able to cooperate with Spain, Italy, UK, the Germany, the countries that are so busy and actually doing things on the ground in Africa. So to move AFRICOM back to South Carolina, for example, which is one of the proposals that's out there, to me is a terrible idea. Because you'll end up having to put a forward headquarters back over there anyway, just the way CENTCOM has a gigantic forward headquarters sitting down in the Middle East. So combining headquarters, yes, there are efficiencies, but we are not Napa Auto Parts. I mean, this is not a business where you want no excess anything. We're talking about security and strategic thinking, and you have to have some capacity to absorb all the stuff that we never saw coming, to be able to absorb the friction until we figure out what's actually happening and then can bring over. So Spangdahlem is a place, it's worth every penny to keep for the inevitable requirements that will show up. So we can't let efficiency be the enemy of effectiveness.
Phil, we had a question from our colleague, Phil Peterson, who was asking about the MK Air Base and its vulnerable air defense. Would it not make more sense to have an air base that's better protected by the Carpathians than to have the MK base is too exposed to an attack? Do you agree with that view? Is it make more sense to have something in Romania that's better sheltered by geography?
Well, what I'm going to say is going to sound horribly critical, but I think it's pretty close to factually correct. None of our European bases have adequate air defense. None of our European land forces have adequate air defense. None of our European air bases have adequate tactical ballistic missile defense. These are things that we lost during the focus on counterinsurgency around the world. When we started to draw down the very first time during my watch as the Secretary in Afghanistan, and we said, okay, before we draw forces down too far, let's examine our ability to do large force employment, Article 5 type defense. And one of the things that we realize very early is that we have neglected our support to the air defense and missile defense mission around the world. Ben will laugh, but when we were young people and we were running around in Western Germany facing the inter-German border, and I was with 2nd Brigade 3rd Infantry Division as their forward air controller, we had to do things called herringbone maneuvers, where we would scamper under the trees and then the stingers and the hawks would try to provide us cover, at least thinking about it back then. And now I think, Ben, I don't want to speak for you, but he would tell you that over time, even at NCT and other places, we have lost some of that emphasis. We have certainly lost that capability. So I don't want to belittle Phil's question. It's a good question.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say that this is, well, I couldn't even say what I'm about to say, but trying to choose, a base based on air defense, what I might compare that to. This is like honor among thieves or something like that. We really don't have enough air defense to go around, period.
Well, thank you, Phil, for sharing that. I mean, that's it's a good perspective. I mean, you need air defense all around, and I think many of the allies, even the Lithuanians, are now buying a high altitude air defense, and so I think that's on the agenda. I would like to turn now to Ben. We're going to pull up a map of Poland, and I'd like to ask you, Ben, just to kind of walk through with the 1,000 man deployment to Poland that Pompeo announced on Sunday. Where do you think these forces are going to go? And can you just walk us through and kind of understanding about Poland, what we're putting into Poland, what's based there, how important is it?
Okay, so of course, this latest announcement, this is not related to the proposed withdrawal from Germany. These are plans that have been in the works for quite some time. General Cavoli and his staff at USER, UCOM, and of course back in the building working with our Polish allies to improve deterrence and to do this in a way that would ideally preserve cohesion of the alliance. I've never been in favor of permanent basing of anything in former Warsaw Pact countries or former Soviet republics, because even though the Russians completely abrogated the NATO-Russia Founding Act, most of our European allies believe it's still important that we live up to the NATO-Russia Founding Act. So unless the administration was willing to do all the very hard diplomatic work to get everybody else to agree that permanent basing in Poland, for example, or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Romania or Bulgaria, then I think going with rotational forces is the appropriate thing. And frankly, I always liked having rotational forces in Poland and Baltic countries, because for the 9-month rotation, you actually got more work and presence out of them than if they were, say, permanently based there. Secondly, what we really need along the eastern flank are enablers, engineers, transporters, military police, communications, intelligence, that sort of thing. And most of that in the U.S. Army and air defense, most of that is in the reserve component of the United States Army by design. So they're ideally suited for rotational employment. Having said that, between the embassy and the Polish government and the Department of Defense, they've been working hard to hammer out the Defense Cooperation Agreement, which was just signed. And so what the three biggest, most important things that are going into Poland, in addition to obviously our enhanced forward presence battle group, which you see up there in the top right corner, is the Corps headquarters, the division headquarters, and the logistics hub in Poznan. Polvitz, there, which is really modeled after MK. It's a Polish base, air base. The U.S. Air Force uses it episodically, and we've got more than 1,000 U.S. Army logisticians and Army aviators that rotate in and out of there, and that is the logistical muscle for everything that we do between Poland and the Baltic countries. And so that's an important capability that you can be sure that the Western military district leadership of Russia sees that. And when they see the logistics preparation capability, they say, okay, these guys are serious. Now, Polvitz has to be protected by Polish air defense because there is no U.S. air defense to protect it, as Phil just said. In Poznan, we have the division headquarters and the Corps headquarters. Now, of course, these are not the full headquarters. It's a division forward, which is not a new idea. Back in the day, we had 1st Infantry Division forward and 2nd Armored Division forward in West Germany, along with the full divisions that were there. This gives a division headquarters tactical command capability, which will be very helpful. It demonstrates capability for deterrence and for organizing the training. The Corps headquarters is really significant because this is where you integrate the joint fight and intelligence, deep fires, logistics, and work in the theater. So this is a very important step and a real quality improvement. And my friend Ray Wojcik suggested that the Corps headquarters should be known as the Kosciuszko Corps. I love the idea because no other person symbolizes better the relationship between Poland, the United States, and Lithuania than does Tadeusz Kosciuszko. Of course, there's a statue of him in D.C. and up at West Point. A critical part, and this will be my last point here, again, it's got to be about readiness. Poland, I believe, is working hard to improve the training and maintenance facilities there in Drawsko-Pomorskie and Żagań in Western Poland. Until now, with the rotational armor brigade, they have to go back to Germany, to Grafenwehr, to use the live fire ranges there. Those are the best live fire ranges in all of Europe in Grafenwehr. So if Poland can get the gunnery ranges up to the same level of quality and also allow, attack aviation and Air Force to shoot there at the same time, then I think those will be good training areas. Otherwise, the Army will have to continue rotating units back to Germany for their live fire gunnery.
Ben, Ray Wojcik has a shout out to you. He's the director of SEPA Warsaw. He had an interesting question that was, could a Poland and German senior exchange officer be assigned to the 5th Corps HQ in the U.S. and a German officer in Poland? Would that work? Yeah,
of course. We do that now. I bet the Air Force does it. We have Canadian and British flag officers, general officers, serving at 18 Airborne Corps at Fort Bragg, 82nd Airborne Division, 3rd U.S. Corps at Fort Hood. I think there's one of our 1st Corps in Fort Lewis, Washington. So I don't know how you not do that. We have
I'm sorry for interrupting, Ben. Those precedents have long been set. I mean, you had a German chief of staff in the headquarters that you ran. And I mean, we have embraced many of our compatriot allies in these real positions, looking at real intelligence and really directing and helping to direct U.S. forces in these places. That those precedents are set, Glenn.
Yeah. Having a allied officer with real authority in the headquarters it changes attitudes. It makes you think more about allies and what you do. And the United States, we can't fight by ourselves. We have to have allies. And so it would make great sense having Polish, German, Lithuanian officers inside this U.S. Corps headquarters and the division headquarters and vice versa.
We have someone watching who is in Scandinavia, and they had a question about how do you see the role of the military in the North, especially in the role of Sweden and Finland, even though they're not full members of NATO. What are your perspectives on their future role and within NATO?
I'll tell you what, I'll jump on that first, and then I'm sure Ben will have some words. First of all, these are already NATO partners, and they are wonderful partners. In fact, their militaries are extremely capable, and frankly, in some instances, their militaries are far more compatible with our older NATO forces than some of our newer NATO forces. The interoperability specifically, and Ben, I'll let you talk to the Army, but the specific interoperability of their navies and their air forces is absolutely superior. And can you imagine any fight happening in the North that did not involve the airspace and sea space of these two nations? I think that we have an incredible relationship with our northern partners, and it will serve us well should the need ever arise. And I have said it more than one time, you know, this is all about the sovereign decisions of those people in those nations. But when, if anybody had asked me for my vote, and they wouldn't have, by the way, it's completely political. But if they'd asked me, I'd have welcomed them with both arms flung wide open. These are great military forces, great capabilities, and we could not have a conflict in the North that they would not in.
I ditto everything the boss just said. I would add that because of Sweden and Finland, we, the Alliance, have the chance to achieve sea control of the Baltic Sea very quickly. And in fact, I believe that the Kremlin probably in their heart of hearts know that Kaliningrad is a liability for them, less an asset. We don't have that same capability in the Black Sea region. And so it really takes a lot of pressure off of us if you've got Sweden and Finland acting and modernize the way they are, training like they do. We had U.S. Army troops in both Finland and in Sweden over the past years on exercise. Sweden is joining the community of Patriot air and missile defense systems. So I very not only positive sense of what they do and the quality, but you know, when you think about Russia's threat to our NATO ally Norway, having friends in Finland and Sweden helps with the protection of Norway as well.
Phil, we had a question. I don't know if you want to address this, but it certainly will get attention if you want to respond. It's regards the delicate question about, does NATO need nuclear deterrence capacities on its eastern flank? This is coming from Jacob Borneo, and I think he's alluding to the fact that Poland has expressed interest in having nuclear weapons based in Poland. I know there is this debate going on, but how do you feel about expanding the nuclear deterrence capacities on its eastern flank?
I'm afraid I probably won't have the answer that the individual wants. I really am concerned about where we are with nukes writ large when it comes to Russia and when it comes to Russia and China. The INF was defunct. Russia abrogated the INF a long time ago. Our announcement that we were backing out, of course, was made, but you know, we were the only one that was in the agreement. So it's kind of hard to back out of it when you're the only one that's in it. But the bottom line is we need an INF or an INF-like agreement. It would be really nice if we could work such an agreement in a tri-party way with China, but I understand all of the smart people that say that's a bridge too far. But I believe we need to be looking at another INF-like agreement. And you know what? It's interesting. Again, I have a different view than people who are in weapons and limitations and control. I'm less worried about the warheads. I'm more worried about the delivery systems and the fact that there are so many dual delivery systems in the Russian inventory that makes it nearly impossible to do any sort of verification about where you have actual nuclear ability. If you have a delivery system, you don't know whether there are made nuclear weapons or whatever. So I'm really worried that we don't have an INF-like treaty, and that is no criticism of leaving the INF, because I want to say it one more time clearly. Russia had abrogated that treaty a long time ago. We were the only one in it. But we need something to replace it. And then secondarily, I would hate to see New START fall by the wayside. We need a START kind of agreement. And again, it would be wonderful to have something that included China in these kinds of conversations. Again, I understand how far that leap is to get to that. But that doesn't mean we don't try on INF, and that doesn't mean we don't try on bigger START kind of arrangements. I believe we need nuclear limitation and all manner of discussions that would lower our possibility of a nuclear exchange, or if you want to say it the other way, raise that threshold by which we might get to nukes. I see some really unhealthy rhetoric coming out of people like the head of Russia Today and other people recently about where Russia is on its nuclear capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. And I just don't think that right now I would be ratcheting up tensions on nukes. Now, having said all of that, when we go to the negotiating table, there's all manner of ways to negotiate. So I'll close with that.
We got a question. We have a very some prestigious people on the event today. We got a question from Sandy Bearspow, and his question is, it's directed at General Hodges, but it certainly, Phil, if you want to weigh in. His question is, in light of the decisions about Germany and what General Hodges said about the importance of Germany being the rear for deterrence along the eastern flank, if the next administration revisits the Esper plan, which U.S. forces slated for withdrawal would you recommend retaining in Germany? 3rd Cavalry, for example, enablers, which ones?
Well, thanks to Ambassador Stanley Birchbaum for the question. I would tell you, none of it should be coming out because it's already so small. I mean, this administration just recently agreed to increase the amount of U.S. Army that's in Europe. We are in Germany with the headquarters for an artillery brigade, more air defense, all these things that were desperately needed, and in a place where you already have infrastructure, you have the ability to maintain readiness. So if the question is, which one could we afford to lose the most? Because we are so thin, when we went from 300,000 to 30,000, we now have one of each thing: one air defense battalion, one special forces battalion, one protection battalion, one intelligence battalion. So whatever you take out, or if you salami slice 30% reduction of any of those, in effect, that's 100% reduction of that particular capability. And so I don't sound very reasonable, of course, but I don't know that there's any of them what I would advocate relocating anywhere.
Phil, do you have any?
No, Ben's got it. I mean, we you know, in light of the fact that there were some directed cuts, not only in Germany but in Europe, the team has put together a group of options that do provide some opportunities. They will provide a few challenges. And I think Ben has talked to the one-eaches.
Well, thank you very much. I think we kind of cover a lot of areas, and I think we're going to end with kind of one last, sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but there have been some people asked about your impressions of what's happening in Belarus, and what is the importance of what's happening in Belarus, NATO. Do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
I think I opened a little bit with it. You know, there are really smart people on both sides of this issue. Some saying that Russia will be measured and that we don't expect to see anything and that there's no real advantage for Russia in going in. Others on the other side are looking at this and pointing lots of similarities to the Revolution of Dignity or the Maidan in Ukraine and how Russia reacted to the possibility of someone moving out. So I just think there's too much uncertainty out there, and anybody that tells you they know what's going to happen, I would immediately take with a grain of salt.
Ben?
Yeah, let me close with this, with thanking you and Phil and the audience one more time. Just a couple of days ago, we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Warsaw, where Polish forces stopped Bolshevik forces in what's known as the Miracle on the Vistula. And most serious and academics believe that that probably prevented a much larger takeover by the Bolsheviks of Europe. I mean, Germany was next on the list. And so a weak Germany post-World War I. And the 12th anniversary of Russia's invasion of Georgia. So, and they're still there 12 years after the signing of the so-called Sarkozy agreement. When they said they would leave, they're still there. They're still occupying Transnistria. They still occupy illegally Crimea. So the point is, everybody needs to have their eyes wide open. Russia only respects strength. They despise weakness. And when it comes to Belarus, I'm a little concerned to see leaders like from Germany and France and the EU reaching out to the Kremlin as if the Kremlin should have a great say in what happens. That this should be a sovereign decision by the people of Belarus. Now, I'm not naive, but the message to the Kremlin should be stay out and let people of Belarus. This is not the 18th century where Germany and France and Russia get to decide what happens to all the smaller countries in between. I think that Germany should work very hard to earn or regain the trust of Poland. This nuclear question, that's because the Poles do not trust Germany. They're not sure, in general, they're not really sure that Germany will be there for them, even though they're NATO allies. And I'm generalizing here, but I think Germany, as the leading nation in Europe, has a responsibility to make sure that all our allies know that they can count on Germany and in time of crisis. And then the final thing I'd say, I agree with General Breedlove that pulling out of INF was completely justified. Just there's this pattern, we leave everything. I mean, the administration has left 4 or 5 different things. Every one of them flawed, by the way. But the latest leave, of course, is the idea to pull troops out of Germany. I would say the States of America, a powerful country, the leader that everybody looks up to. Everybody loves to criticize, but everybody looks up to the United States. The theme should be lead, not leave, and fix it from within.
Well, listen, gentlemen, and thank you. Wanted to thank you, General Breedlove, General Hodges. Thank you for participating today. And everyone who's watched us online. We had over 150 people watch us today. We appreciate your interest in Jamestown, this issue moving forward. So thank you, everyone. Have a safe and restful summer, and we'll see you in the fall. Thanks,
Lynn.